Thank you very much for attending September this month in cybersecurity. We have a fair number of things to cover this month, a very active month in the news industry. We always put up this slide just to kind of remind ourselves that security needs to be taken in context, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover with equal weighting for prevention of events as well as to reaction to events, especially relevant to have reaction to events this month. That will be one of our topic areas. The buckets that we're going to use this month to kind of organize the stories are the following: impersonation, email security, emergency response, and if there's time at the end, I'm going to do a demonstration of multi-factor authentication. Some of the stories we are pulling from the news. Other stories we're going to be pulling, and this is kind of a little bit of a change. We're going to be making them what I'll call hyper-local stories, meaning things that have occurred very close to home here recently, and then we tried to organize these into buckets we thought were logical. So let's get started with, and these are some of the stories, by the way, that we're pulling from. We also had a number of customer and or people that we had knowledge of with regards to events that have occurred in this past month also. So let's begin the learning process. And again, you'll have access to these links as part of the download of the PDF or watching the URL after on the recording. So impersonation is just what it sounds like, right? Acting like someone else. And this happens all the time on our network, and that's one of the things we're chartered to protect as IT professionals. So let's get into some of the stories that occurred this month. If you don't know the face, you might know the name. This is Jack Dorsey. He is the CEO of Twitter, okay, a rather large platform. And you can imagine that suddenly on a Friday, when he was tweeting out dozens of racial slurs, that was a bit of a surprise to many of his followers as well as himself. The hackers had taken advantage of a text-to-tweet service that Twitter offers. It's kind of hard to say, but text-to-tweet service means that access to the phone would get you access to tweeting. And as we have reported previously, Jack Dorsey had his SIM swapped. SIM swap is the little device in your phone that makes that your phone. The hackers convinced a mobile phone provider that they were the owners of that. And in the nutshell, he got impersonated, and it was embarrassing, right? Which the access to the phone record is kind of leads nicely to our next story. And again, some of these stories are going to be a little bit quick. Facebook. Facebook breaches, I think, have been reported, quite often through this forum and others. Facebook itself, in this case, wasn't hacked, but a database with 20% of their overall users was posted with no security. It contained phone numbers for nearly 133 million U.S.-based users. The database was approximately a year old, so it wasn't from a recent breach or anything. It was closed down later and so forth. But essentially, if someone wanted to tie you to your phone number, or Jack Dorsey to his phone number, it's now hunting season. The net result of this, it will likely lead to more spam phone calls, and also SIM swaps will likely continue to be an issue, especially if someone wanted to specifically target you. Recall that SIM swaps are prevented with a PIN on your mobile phone number account and or using an MFA provider. Interesting story here. This was a new term you may not have heard before called Vishing. The CEO in UK was the target. He believed wholeheartedly that he was speaking to the CEO of his business, a parent company, which was based out of Germany. He believed wholeheartedly that he heard instructions through this person commanding him via voice to send some money, in this case approximately $243,000, to a Hungarian supplier within the hour. It was so realistic it sounded just like him. Quote unquote, it was a near perfect replica of his T's gravelly timbre, which apparently is an annotation of his voice. Anyway, the article references a blog that can actually show this artificial intelligence listening to voices and emulating that voice in action. But this technology is commercially available now. The net is impersonations are going to continue. Some may become verbal. And future criminal uses of this voice technology could be election manipulation, impersonating a family member, or gaining security and clearance. So impersonation begins with phishing. Kind of an interesting one. We kind of hope this never happens to us. This wasn't even in our country here, but this has to do with immaculate and instant memory for numbers. A gentleman in Japan, his name is Yasuki Taniguchi, a 34-year-old part-time cashier working at a mall in Koto City, Japan, had not what is usually known as a photographic memory. This is actually described as an eidetic memory, which means you can memorize these things for minutes, not for months. But essentially with his eidetic memory, he memorized the phone numbers, the numbers on the card, the expiration date, and the CVV code, and he wrote it in a journal at the end of the day. He then used those credit cards to buy goods, sell them at a pawn shop, and covered his living expenses. Now, the good news is his great memory does not equal genius, as he made several large purchases and shipped those to his house, which was tracked by authorities, and that's eventually how he got caught. So the net is impersonation can happen. You monitor your transactions on your credit card, or if you're in Office 365, you're obviously going to want to monitor all the logins that are occurring on your 365. Hopefully you're doing that. If not, we have a service that does that. In Ecuador, it'd be a bad day to be an Ecuadorian resident. There's about 20 million accounts. The sad part is this also includes 7 million minors. Okay. The data that was obfuscated is addresses, phone numbers, places and dates of birth, marital statuses, family members, levels of education, bank information, job title and company, bank balances, credit information, mortgage. Didn't see anything about health, but I think outside of that, you got just about everything else. This was every Ecuadorian resident. Was all leaked. The database was actually provided to a data analytics firm in Miami. And the ironic part of this is that Julian Assange, who was the founder of WikiLeaks, was actually provided asylum in Ecuador, and all of his information was included in the leak. Password reuse. Remember, we're still on impersonation here. Password reuse. Did you know that 39% of adults in the U.S. are using the same passwords for multiple online sources? Does this include you? This happens, and sometimes you'll get an email, and watch this one switch here. Okay. If you got an email that said, "I'm aware that XXX was your password," and XXX truly was your password, or truly had been your password, you might be more enticed to open up that email. And if you're enticed to open up that email, you might equally be more enticed to follow instructions of that email, which might say, go here, pay this, click here. It is very possible, obviously, that a leak on one site can leak to another. So the net, and in fact, this happened to me last week. I got an email. It's a really old email or an old password that I had used long time ago. Actually came into my inbox. So we sent it through proper procedures here at our organization for analysis and so forth. And really, it's just becoming a little bit more common nowadays to be sent your own password in email with the goal of getting you and take actions. You can imagine that that when this happens, you're more likely to click on it. So the goal is here to monitor your online identities. Again, we have a service that can do this either as a one-time scan or alert when identities from your domain, anyone in your organization, pop up. Okay, and last but not least in the impersonation, or last public story, was that Apple Marketing obviously created the great billboard there and posted it, but Google Threat Analytics Group, known as TAG, I don't know why the acronym, Threat Analytics Group, and Project Zero did some research, and apparently there's been a small collection of websites getting thousands of visitors per week that have been infecting iPhones since 2017. What they do is, as you kind of drive by using the Safari browser onto these websites, they plant using some exploits that were available that have been basically patched, though some phones obviously haven't been patched to current. Also found 1.0 day. Using those exploits, they basically infected the phone with a monitoring implant. This monitoring implant would provide location data, passwords, and contacts, among other sensitive details. The net is impersonation and data theft is occurring. Always be on the latest OS. Patch and patching will likely help. Last night I actually was at a security awareness, providing security awareness demonstration to some folks, and we were talking about being on the latest, and I started mentioning about who was on Windows 7 versus Windows 10. And about half of the room was on Windows 7 still. So they were at a security awareness talking about how concerned they were about security awareness, and yet they were still on Windows 7, an operating system that effectively will not be getting any patches starting in January of next year. So it's high time to start your planning for Windows 10 for your organization if you have not already. All right, a couple, I'll call them more personal stories. We had an organization we're aware of that was subject to social engineering. One of their employees got a phone call that was instructing them that they wanted to help with their Apple ID. Ironically, this user happened to need Apple ID support. They provided some details regarding that Apple ID and their desire to help. They were able to help, but they needed some gift cards as part of compensation for that. So after running out and getting gift cards, they came back to work, got back in touch with the person, and they were provided a URL to provide the gift cards, which also allowed the remote people to install some software, which allowed them to drain a checking account and a savings account. So after being out some gift cards, the checking account, and savings account, 1 day later they notified IT. Okay. This was an incident from the very get-go, and 24 hours later is when notification occurred. We'll talk later about who do you call when situations like that occur, but certainly there was a lot of impersonation and it was a deep breach, if you will, in that case. Another story, we had a phishing email that was sent into HR. I can imagine that they received them with some frequency. In this particular case, it was sent from Gmail, but the display name looked accurate. And so a lot of people are just checking the display name on the email that they're getting and not looking at the full domain where it came from. The banner stating that it was from outside was there, but those tend to get ignored. In any case, the email asked the HR employee to make a direct deposit change for one individual. The direct deposit change was made, and after one payroll cycle had gone through, the incident was discovered, as you can imagine. So these things are happening. Impersonation's real, and we'll move on to our next topic of email security. I'll breeze through these a little bit faster. So email security, we chat about email security quite often. In this particular case, I want to make you aware of calendar stuffing. Calendar stuffing is very convenient for end users. What this means is that maybe on your iPhone or your Android device, when you're making hotel, dining, plane or train reservations or paying recurring bills, those emails can show up in your calendar because there's some bad defaults. Apple, Google, and Microsoft all have default settings to accept calendar invites from anyone. So an email like you see on your screen, which has some malicious links in it, would be added onto your calendar. Again, making you more likely to look at it especially based on a free item like an iPhone X Max, ready for pickup, and so forth. So the net result is you need to change the defaults to prevent the invites from getting on your calendars. It's an interesting one, probably a little hard for you to read. You don't need to necessarily look at the details as much as know. This was an email that was sent out to United Rental, which is a large organization with about 18,000 employees. They have a very large database of customers. All of their lucky customers were the recipients of this email, which basically was asking for payment on invoices, as you can imagine. Those URLs pointed to sites that they did not control. The email breach occurred through their marketing partner, who had access to their CRM system and was not leveraging multi-factor authentication, one of the controls they had set up, to go into it. And through that breach, I'll say thousands of emails went out looking like this, and some of their customers were victims sending money improperly to the wrong location, and obviously suffered some pretty significant reputational damage amongst those customers, even the ones that didn't fail. Again, don't focus too much on the details of this, but I do want to make you aware of what is being said is a pretty malicious phishing attempt that's out there. This is I'll call it a multi-stage phishing attempt, where there are actually 3 different websites that get implemented here. This is all developed and also into a kit that anyone can go use, download. I don't know whether it's for purchase or for free, but it's a 3-stage where initially you're clicking a link, going to a website. Kind of step 2 is getting your credentials, right, and seeing if you'll provide those. And then step 3 is stealing some PII and payment data. All of this at the very end, with all the data, it actually gets dropped into, uses a technique called steganography, which is where all the data is actually put inside of a picture. So a lot of the tools for exfiltration of data won't even see the data going out of your organization because it's inside of a picture. This is called HeatStroke. The major vendors are aware of it, but I wanted to make sure you are aware of the type of threats that we're up against. From a customer perspective, we had a couple customers that either saw and recognized business email compromise in flight, or we were able to recognize this on behalf of our customers. Customer number 1, basically the end user kind of noticed something fishy, and just the email threads seemed to be disjointed a little bit. They got us involved, and we looked at some of the threads, and it did become disjointed. In fact, there was an email rule on the inbox taking some of the messages and storing them in the RSS feeds folder, which is a common folder phishing proponents tend to be using to hide email threads. So long story short is they did catch it. The user properly, through probably security awareness training, was able to recognize a disjointed thread and get notified and get help. And it's certainly one of the things that our Office 365 security health check would catch. Similarly, we had 1 or 2 other customers that were at the very beginning, where we were starting to see logins and notified them of logins occurring from Nigeria, which tends to be a place where happens to have a lot of phishing scams going out of there. We reset passwords and life moved on. So that was the very, very beginning of likely what have been a more deep phishing attack and so forth. And the last and final area that I wanted to chat through was our emergency response. Emergency response, as you may recall, takes on a number of areas, both from, we have 911 services, right, for fire and police and burglaries and other accidents of a physical nature. But one of the things that you may not be thinking about is, who are you calling in a 911 incident when you have incidents? I've mentioned 4 hyper-local incidents that have occurred this month or were just prevented. What's the next step on that? And I think it's time for us to kind of think through this a little bit more. So let's walk through some national stories here first. First and foremost, September is National Preparedness Month, ironically. So, Hallmark has their holidays. The government, I guess, gets to declare entire months. So they get to declare September as National Preparedness Month. And this means you are supposed to go through the steps of having an incident response plan, not only for you and your family, which is part of its intention, but also you as a business. Who's chartered to have an incident response plan? Is that an IT plan or is that a business plan? What are the assets that need to get guarded? Which ones need to get responded to? What does your team look like? So, and look forward to, and stay tuned. Obviously, October, the month coming up in just a week here, is actually Security Awareness Month, which will be a whole other topic for us. But we'll stick on the topic of being prepared. And let's take a look at some of the things that happened as Hurricane Dorian came through. One of the things that you might not think about, but I think is certainly interesting to think about, is the fact that price gouging runs rampant during this time frame, right? We have an emergency. Services are going to be extra expensive, right? Access to those services, whether those be legal services, IT services, and so forth, there is an opportunity to do price gouging during when people are in crisis, right? And so thinking these things through is awful important. You see on the screen, the Attorney General was noting about 2,000 reports of price gouging that had been reported in the weeks prior to the hurricane, heading towards Florida. And I'd also make us aware, kind of on a similar story. This reminds me, if you see this slide before, it's because we've presented it in maybe a year ago. But it was Florence hurricane. I think it was last year, and you could juxtapose Dorian in there too. But also what pops up is thousands of sites that are fake donation sites. So note in the upper left-hand corner, it's actually called Hurricane Florence Relief Fund. Well, sounds legitimate. Go ahead and click that donate now, and you'll where it says 80% of your donations will go to first responders in North and South Carolina, and it'll try to guide you there. Well, there's a lot of Better Business bureaus around charities that you can leverage to see if they're a legitimate charity. GuideStar, Wise Giving, Alliance, Charity Watch. In any case, disasters are an opportunity for gouging and phishing, and it's a cruel time to kind of do a test, but these are good things to be thinking through. We did have also an event 2 weeks ago. This was an event that Peters & Associates ran. We had this gentleman, Joe Crimmins, from Serve and Protect. He came to our event, which was the Taste of Technology tour. Hopefully you got a chance to attend, and if not, you'll see a recap blog on it. And certainly we'll hope to run that event again. We're very successful with 60 plus customers there. That said, Joe specifically was talking about preparedness, and he was talking specifically about active shooter, an area where he has some experience. So we brought him in, and a lot of his dialogue was around the run, hide, fight mantra, which is part of their idea. So the goal was, with proper planning, be prepared, not scared, and that can apply to physical as well as cyber incidents. And last but not least in this, emergency response is the idea that these municipal attacks, which I've been chatting about for months now, they're continuing. And I heard on the news Lake County. I'm like, whoa, that's really close to home. Now, when I dug into the details, it turned out to be Lake County, Indiana, which isn't as close. But in any case, the result of this attack, was ransomware, just like other municipalities. They had down systems, inability to communicate. Residents were unable to pay parking tickets, water bills. The Julie requests for the utilities and construction projects were basically placed on hold for 10 days while they responded to this incident. But it made me wonder, who did they call for help? Did they have legal experts, IT, support, forensics, insurance, communication, and PR experts at the ready? Did they pre-think through who would do what, when this ransomware occurred? I certainly hope that the plan was put to paper. So from a customer perspective, we had, an organization that also had a ransomware incident, a compromised account. where in addition to the compromised account, compromised credentials, which I think everyone could probably argue it's somewhere, somehow, they're getting a hold of organizational credentials, right? They're either buying it, they're phishing it, or they're guessing it. But with those compromised credentials, also, interestingly, we're finding that organizations are finding openings through RDP ports. And so organizations either have open RDP ports now, or RDP ports are being opened, and that's how organizations, hackers, if you will, are taking advantage of those admin privileges. They're typically, from a ransomware perspective, there is something called a kill chain, meaning they're planting some of this ransomware. They're working their way around the network, both for lateral movement in terms of account acceleration to get higher privileges, as well as deleting backups and making sure that their ransomware is triggered in various areas on your network and all set off to go all at the same time. In this particular case, this was a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And we had another organization that let go, one of their employees, and previously that they looked back, and previously that employee had sent 500 emails to their Gmail account. Some protections were in place, but they were in monitor mode, not enforcing. So, long story short is, who are you going to call when these incidents occur? When things hit the proverbial fan. So that's our goal around emergency response. I will remind you that we always have events planned. We have a number of October events that are just in the works. We're just about to have those organized and up on our website, but please check often and certainly sign up for our September this month in security. Blogs, we post 2 or 3 blogs a week. These were just a couple. How are you celebrating National Preparedness Month? I thought might be an appropriate one for you there. And football season is back. Way to go, Bears. How are you defending your end zone, right? So a couple good events and or blogs for you to check out. And obviously, if there's things that you would like to experience through our organization, some of these can come at no or low cost, and we're certainly willing to engage with you if you've got some interests or concerns. We're certainly happy to talk to you also, and free coffee on the house anytime. So